Mystery in Spain as Irish couple found dead beside hot tub by their teenage children. Spanish police have launched an investigation after an Irish couple were found dead beside a hot tub at a rented property in the coastal resort town of Cullera near Valencia. Now we explore the truth, the mystery, and every detail of this story on our AI podcast.
Imagine stepping into a scenario where um, where the physical evidence basically points to two entirely different realities at the exact same time.
Yeah.
Like on one track, the clues are suggesting this was a tragic, environmental freak accident.
Right.
But then on the other track, you look at the exact same scene and it suggests a violent physical altercation. And, until you actually process the evidence, both of those realities kind of exist simultaneously.
They do, yeah.
So today, our mission in this deep dive is to look at a real-life case that is just, well, it's forcing investigators to solve two completely contradictory mysteries all at once. We're looking into the sudden and still totally unexplained deaths of an Irish couple at a rented holiday property in Spain.
Yeah, and, the location itself plays a massive role in why this is so complex.
Right.
They were staying in Cullera, which is just south of Valencia, specifically in this highly exclusive neighborhood called Cap Blanc. And this area, it's nestled right into the steep slopes of Faro Mountain. So it's designed, like from an architectural standpoint, to be a completely private sanctuary.
So lots of walls out of the way.
Exactly. You have these beautiful terrace villas looking out over a sparkling bay, and they're deliberately isolated from the bustling, historic seaside resort that's, down below.
Wow. And, that isolation really sets the stage for what I think is the most unsettling part of this whole narrative. Because the property is just so secluded. The discovery of this tragedy, it wasn't made by like a random passerby walking their dog.
No.
Or a delivery driver dropping off a package. The discovery happened entirely within the private walls of the villa, and it was made by the people who are arguably the most vulnerable in this entire scenario.
Yeah. The victims' teenage children.
God,
They're 14 and 16 years old.
Oh, man.
And according to the timeline that authorities have released, it was a Tuesday afternoon when these two siblings found their parents deceased, lying naked near the property's hot tub.
I mean, the human toll of that specific moment is just almost impossible to comprehend.
Absolutely.
You have two teenagers whose entire reality has just been shattered in a fraction of a second. They're in a foreign country, they don't speak the local language, and they're obviously engulfed in immediate, just absolute panic.
Right.
But they managed to run to the owner of the property for help. And that homeowner is the one who initiated the massive emergency response, calling in local police, medical personnel, and eventually, homicide detectives.
Yeah, and adding just another layer of complexity to an already devastating situation is a detail from local reports indicating that these siblings, they required additional support in their daily lives, even prior to this event. So local authorities, they recognized the extreme fragility of the situation immediately. They didn't just send badges and uniforms,
Yeah.
They deployed a social worker and a psychologist directly to the scene while also coordinating with a relative who was traveling from Ireland to take guardianship.
Okay, hold on. I need to stop you there because the logistics of this are kind of driving me crazy.
Okay.
You're telling me the first responders arrive at a scene with two bodies, potentially toxic water, and these unexplained wounds, which I know we'll get into.
Real, yeah.
And a primary operational focus is deploying a psychologist for the teenagers.
Yes.
I mean, from a pure investigative standpoint, is that a massive risk?
Yeah.
Like every single minute they spend gently building rapport and providing therapy to these kids is a minute where a potential suspect could be fleeing the country. Or, that hot tub's automated filtration system is actively scrubbing away chemical evidence.
I know, it sounds counterintuitive.
Right. How do investigators justify prioritizing psychological care over securing that fleeting physical evidence?
Well, so that is the ultimate tightrope walk of modern law enforcement. And they justify it because human memory under extreme trauma is actually the most fragile piece of evidence at any crime scene. Yeah. If you treat a traumatized, neurodivergent teenager like a hostile witness, and you just pepper them with aggressive questions through a translator.
Scammering them for fact.
Exactly. You aren't just being callous. You are actively destroying evidence.
Wow.
See, when the human brain experiences sudden, catastrophic shock, It floods the system with cortisol.
Okay.
And this severely impairs the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain responsible for encoding chronological memories.
So they might not even physically be able to remember the sequence of events, like the timeline just scrambled.
Yes, or gone completely. And worse than that, the brain hates a vacuum. If an investigator pushes too hard, asking leading questions like, did you see someone run away?
Oh, I see.
A traumatized brain might unintentionally fabricate a memory just to fill that terrifying gap in its understanding.
Oh, wow.
It's a phenomenon called confabulation.
Confabulation.
Right. So the police deploy trauma-informed psychologists because they need to extract the timeline. When the parents were last seen, what the house sounded like, the exact state of the doors and windows, but they have to do it without corrupting the data.
That makes a lot of sense.
Because the physical evidence in the hot tub, that's bound by the laws of physics, right? It can often be reconstructed later. But once a witness's memory is tainted by leading questions in the midst of a panic attack, you can literally never get the original memory back.
Never. Right. So the children are essentially the ground zero of the timeline. So securing their uncorrupted memory is just as vital as securing the physical perimeter.
Exactly.
But, let's shift to that physical perimeter, because the state of the scene, as those teenagers found it, is sending detectives down multiple totally divergent paths.
Yeah, this is where it gets strained.
This is where the evidence becomes incredibly contradictory. We have two highly unusual physical findings that have launched this investigation into just a complete gray area.
Two clues that absolutely refuse to neatly align with one another.
Yeah. So let's lay them out. Clue number one, the wounds.
Right.
The initial reports state that the bodies of both victims had unexplained physical wounds. But investigators on the ground, they couldn't immediately determine how they occurred, like whether they contributed to the actual cause of death, or crucially, whether they were inflicted pre-mortem or post-mortem.
And the timing of those wounds is the entire fulcrum of the case.
How so?
Well, a pre-mortem wound suggests a living, breathing person sustained an injury that obviously opens the door to a struggle, right? A physical altercation with a third party. Or perhaps a desperate attempt to escape an environmental hazard.
Like trying to claw their way out.
Exactly. But a post-mortem wound completely changes the narrative. It suggests that injuries occurred after the victims had already passed away.
Oh, I see.
So maybe due to environmental factors, animal activity, or even just the way the bodies settled against the hard surfaces of the hot tub area.
Which brings us to clue number two, the water itself.
Yeah.
The responding officers specifically noted in their reports that the water in the hot tub was, quote, unusually cloudy.
Right, which creates what we can think of as a sort of Schrodinger's crime scene.
Schrodinger's crime scene. I like that.
Yeah, because investigators are forced to adopt a two-track mindset. So track A treats the entire property as a hazardous environment.
Okay.
Cloudy water can indicate a severe chemical imbalance, right? A toxic breakdown of cleaning agents, or maybe a catastrophic malfunction in the filtration system that could have, say, released a noxious gas.
Oh, wow.
In that scenario, the deaths are a horrific, localized freak accident.
But then track B treats the property as the site of a violent crime. Because there are those unexplained physical wounds on the bodies, detectives have to simultaneously assume a sinister event took place.
Yes.
And the golden rule of crime scene management, from what I understand, is that you can let the theory of track A compromise the investigation of track B.
Precisely. If you just assume it was a chemical leak and you fail to dust for fingerprints or, look for signs of forced entry, and it later turns out to be a homicide,
You're cooked.
you've ruined the case.
Yeah.
And conversely, if you treat it purely as a murder and ignore the hot tub's chemical levels, you might entirely miss the actual cause of a tragic accident. You have to aggressively pursue both realities until the science forces one of them to collapse.
That just seems like an agonizing position for the detectives on the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, they are staring at a scene where someone could have, slipped, sustained a head wound, and fallen into a poorly maintained hot tub.
Right.
Or a toxic cloud of chlorine gas could have caused them to pass out, resulting in post-mortem injuries as they hit the ground. Or a third party was involved, and the cloudy water is just totally a coincidence. Or a result of something the attacker threw into the tub.
Exactly. It's a mess.
So to actually solve this, they have to rely on the absolute objectivity of the lab.
Yeah, the transition from the chaotic crime scene to the sterile environment of the lab, that's where the real answers begin to form. Just after midnight, the bodies were transferred to the Institute of Legal Medicine in Valencia.
Okay.
And the forensic pathologists there, they're tasked with separating those two tracks using postmortem autopsies and very deep-level toxicology panels.
Right. And I really want to dig into the mechanics of that because it's one thing to just say, oh, they do an autopsy, but it's another to understand how they actually pulled the truth out of the tissue.
Yeah.
Like, how does a forensic pathologist look at a wound and declare with scientific certainty whether a heart was beating when that specific cut or bruise happened?
It's fascinating, actually. It all comes down to the body's cellular response to trauma, specifically something called a vital reaction.
A vital reaction.
Yes. So when you are alive and you sustain an injury, say a blow to the head, your heart is actively pumping blood, right? That blood pressure forces red blood cells out of the damaged capillaries and into the surrounding tissue, which is what creates a bruise.
Okay.
And almost immediately, your immune system responds. White blood cells, specifically these things called macrophages, they rush to the site of the injury to clean up the damaged cells and start the healing process.
So they are basically looking for microscopic first responders.
That is a perfect way to conceptualize it.
Right.
Microscopic first responders. If a pathologist takes a tissue sample from the edge of one of those unexplained wounds and puts it under a microscope, a process called histology, they're looking for those macrophages and that forced blood pooling.
Ah, I see.
Because if the person was already deceased when the wound occurred, well, the heart wasn't beating. There's no blood pressure to force blood into the tissue.
And the immune system is just offline.
Exactly. A post-mortem cut might passively leak a little bit of blood just due to gravity, but there will be absolutely no cellular inflammation. So by examining the tissue at a microscopic level, the lab can definitively say if the victims were alive when those wounds were inflicted.
That is incredible. I mean, it eliminates so much of the guesswork.
It really does.
But what about the other side of the equation? Like the toxicology and the water testing? Because they didn't just take the bodies, right? Investigators took samples of that unusual, cloudy hot tub water and sent it off for laboratory analysis as well.
Yeah, so the toxicology and the water analysis work in tandem. The toxicologist will screen the victim's blood and tissue for any foreign substances.
Right.
And this includes, standard checks for alcohol or medication, but they also run specific panels for environmental toxins.
Oh, like what?
Well, they're looking to see, did they inhale chloramine gas? Are there heavy metals in their bloodstream from a degraded heating element in the tub?
Oh, I see. And then they cross-reference that with the actual water samples.
Yes, exactly. They use equipment like a gas chromatography mass spectrometer, or GCMS.
Okay, GCMS.
Right. And this machine, it essentially vaporizes the water sample and blasts it with electrons to break the molecules apart.
Whoa.
Yeah, and then it separates those pieces by their mass. Every chemical compound breaks apart in a unique, identifiable pattern, like a molecular fingerprint.
Oh, that's amazing.
So the lab can look at the readouts and tell investigators precisely what made the water cloudy. Was it an overconcentration of a specific cleaning acid? Was it a foreign substance introduced to the water? Or, was it just organic matter because the filter had been broken for weeks?
Right, right. But the lab can only tell us the biological cause of death, though. I mean, the mass spectrometer can pinpoint a chemical anomaly, and the histology can confirm the timing of a wound. But science cannot tell us who else might have been in that villa at, 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
No, it can't.
So to bridge that gap between the biological how and the narrative who, investigators are kind of forced to step out of the sterile lab and rely on a notoriously unreliable source,
Yep.
the surrounding neighborhood.
Yeah. The ground investigation is running parallel to the lab work, and it is arguably a race against time. Detectives are trying to map out the victims' final hours, tracing their movements, their interactions, and just the general atmosphere of the Blanc neighborhood leading up to the discovery.
And the contrast of this neighborhood is just wild to me. Cullera is this bustling, historic seaside resort packed with tourists having the time of their lives.
Right.
And there's this deeply surreal detail in the local reporting about neighbors who had spent their entire Tuesday down at the beach, just completely oblivious. They pack up their beach chairs, they've got sunburns and ice cream, they drive back up the winding mountain roads to their idyllic terraces, and they are suddenly met with a swarm of police vehicles, crime scene tape, and homicide detectives crawling all over the hillside.
It entirely fractures the illusion of safety. Places like Blanc, they sell tranquility and isolation as a premium amenity. So when that illusion is shattered by the presence of a homicide team, the psychological impact on the community is pretty profound.
I can imagine. And so the police are actively knocking on doors, trying to find anyone who heard or saw anything unusual. But I keep thinking about the layout of this specific hillside.
The terracing.
Right. The architecture of a place like Cap Blanc, it's all
Mhm.
about high walls, terraced elevations, and heavily guarded privacy. You are literally paying a premium so that nobody can look into your backyard or see your hot tub.
Exactly.
So doesn't that architectural emphasis on privacy make it incredibly difficult for police to find visual witnesses?
It does. It certainly reduces the likelihood of a neighbor just casually looking out their kitchen window and witnessing an event, which, is common in a dense, flat, suburban cul-de-sac.
Right.
Visual sightlines are deliberately obstructed by design there. However, the exact same geography that blocks line of sight actually amplifies another critical investigative tool.
What's that?
Acoustics.
Really? Just because of the terracing on the mountain?
Yeah, physics dictates how sound behaves in these environments. On a steep hillside overlooking a bay, especially in a quiet, isolated neighborhood, you often get a temperature inversion.
Okay, I remember that from science class.
Right. Cooler air sits near the water, and warmer air rises up the slope. So sound waves actually refract toward the cooler air, meaning noises can travel incredible distances up and down a hillside with startling clarity.
Wow.
And there are no dense blocks of tall buildings or heavy urban traffic to absorb or scatter the sound.
So a shout, or a heavy splash, or even the sound of a vehicle driving up a private gravel road that doesn't belong there.
Okay.
Those sounds would carry.
Far more clearly than they would in a city center.
That's wild.
So the detectives aren't necessarily looking for someone who saw something. They're desperately searching for auditory witnesses. But, and this is key, there is a massive urgency to this door-to-door canvassing.
Why the rush?
Because in high-profile, shocking local events, especially in tight-knit or affluent communities, an information vacuum forms almost instantly.
Because the police are keeping their cards close to their chest.
Exactly.
They won't release the details of the scene or their working theories until the Institute of Legal Medicine gives them the final autopsy and mass spectrometry reports.
And nature abhors a vacuum, right?
Right.
And human psychology absolutely despises uncertainty. When a community is faced with a terrifying event in their own backyard and the authorities are silent, the community will instinctively fill that void with speculation.
The rumor mill.
Yeah. Rumors start at the local cafe or they spread through neighborhood group chats. And this is where memory contamination becomes a severe threat to the investigation.
But how does gossip actually ruin an investigation, though? Can hearing a rumor genuinely change what you think you heard?
Oh, absolutely. It is a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It's known as retroactive interference.
Retroactive interference.
Yeah. Human memory is not a video recording that you can just rewind and play back
Right.
perfectly.
Right.
Every time you recall a memory, your brain effectively reconstructs it. If a neighbor hears a compelling rumor that, say, there was a violent home invasion,
Their brain might, adjust the memory.
yes, their brain might retroactively fit their own mundane memories to match that dramatic narrative. They might suddenly, quote-unquote, remember hearing a loud, aggressive argument, when in reality, they just heard seagulls fighting over scraps.
Oh, man. The brain tweaks the memory to conform to the dominant social narrative.
Yes. That is why homicide detectives have to lock down a timeline and get untainted formal statements from every neighbor within the first 24 to 48 hours. They have to capture those auditory memories before the rumor mill begins to spin and permanent contamination sets in.
So we essentially have forensic scientists racing to analyze degrading tissue and volatile water samples in a lab, while detectives race to capture degrading acoustic memories on a Spanish hillside.
That's a great way to summarize it, yeah.
The core tension of this deep dive is how incredibly thin the line is between a freak, tragic accident and a sinister criminal event at the very genesis of an investigation.
It is a razor-thin margin, and I think it highlights a fundamental truth about investigative work. The initial facts at a scene are almost always contradictory. They rarely point in a single unified direction on day one.
And in an era where we have been conditioned by social media and instant news cycles to expect immediate answers.
Oh, absolutely.
We want a neat, definitive conclusion wrapped up with a bow within an hour of a headline dropping. But this case is just a masterclass in the necessity of tolerating ambiguity.
It really is.
We have to allow space for the rigorous, painstaking process of actual science. You cannot rush the vaporization of chemicals in a mass spectrometer.
Yep.
You cannot rush a forensic pathologist examining macrophage cells under a microscope. And you cannot rush detectives methodically tracing the physics of sound across a terraced mountain. We simply cannot jump to conclusions based on the jarring contrast of the first few headlines.
Right. It forces us to acknowledge the limits of our initial perception. We
Right.
naturally want the world to be cleanly binary. It was an accident or it was a crime,
Yeah.
but reality is messy. It is found in the microscopic, contradictory details that often take months of patient, methodical work to sort out. The truth isn't found in the initial shock. It is found in the slow synthesis of the data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are all waiting on the Institute of Legal Medicine to tell us the biological reality of how this couple died. But the ultimate success of mapping out the timeline of this tragedy might not rest on high-tech chemical analysis or acoustic physics.
That's true.
It might actually hinge on the fragile, traumatized memory of a teenager in the first 5 minutes of the worst day of their life.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many major, complex cases are ultimately decided not by the infallibility of forensic science, but by the deeply human psychological state of the person.
Okay, one question for you. What could have caused the mysterious deaths of the Irish couple found in a hot tub at their rented Spanish holiday property? And what evidence will investigators examine to determine whether it was an accident or something more serious? Don't forget to comment it. Thanks.